Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? There are nights when silence is not a comfort but a warning. The air in the old house felt thicker than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like an unwanted visitor, but inside, all was still, too still. A sharp contrast to the suffocating silence that filled the air, hanging like a thick fog in the dimly lit hallway. Laura stood at the end of the long corridor, her heart racing in her chest. The floor beneath her feet creaked with every step she took, as though it, too, were unsure of its place in the vast emptiness. She was used to the house's creaks and groans. It was old, after all. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, there was a presence, a feeling that gnawed at her spine and made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Was it just her imagination? She shook the thought away, trying to focus on the reason she was there in the first place. She had moved into the house weeks ago, eager for a fresh start after a difficult year. But this house, with its long history and towering presence, was more than she had bargained for. There were whispers in the town, stories about the house, about things that had happened within its walls. But she wasn't one to give in to local superstition. She had always prided herself on being rational, grounded in reality. Yet, as she walked deeper into the house that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, moving along the walls in ways that defied logic. She could hear faint noises, whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves. At first, she thought it was the wind again, but the sounds were too deliberate, too close. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling despite her attempt at bravado. No answer. Her eyes scanned the hallway, searching for the source of the sound. Her pulse quickened as she noticed something in the far corner of the hallway. A door, slightly ajar, that she hadn't remembered seeing before. It wasn't part of the layout she had studied when she first toured the house. She had explored every inch of this place, or so she thought. Against her better judgment, she walked toward the door. The closer she got, the stronger the pull, like something unseen was urging her to enter. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her footsteps faltered as she reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in darkness. It was unlike any room she had seen in the house. The walls were lined with heavy, old bookshelves, but the books were strange, ancient. There were no titles visible, only dust-covered spines, each one seemingly more mysterious than the last. In the center of the room stood an old armchair, its upholstery worn and faded. It looked like it had been waiting for someone. She stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under her weight. The door slammed shut behind her with a force that sent a jolt through her body. She spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing except the thick silence. She tried the door handle again, but it was locked. Completely, utterly stuck. Her mind raced. Was this part of the house's quirks? Perhaps there was an explanation. But as her eyes adjusted to the dark, something caught her attention. Something that shouldn't have been there. A shadow. It wasn't just a trick of the light or a flaw in her vision. No, this shadow moved. It slithered across the floor like a living thing, and it was heading straight toward her. Her breath caught in her throat, and her heart pounded in her chest. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her pulse. The shadow paused, then, with a sudden movement, rushed toward her. Laura stumbled back, her legs colliding with the armchair as she fell. She scrambled to get back up, her hands searching frantically for anything to grab onto. Her eyes darted around the room, but there was nothing to protect her, nothing to defend herself with. And then, A voice. It was low, barely a whisper, but it was unmistakable. Leave. The word hung in the air like a warning, sharp and commanding. Laura froze. The room grew colder, the air thickening, pressing against her chest. The shadow had stopped moving, but she could still feel its presence, like a cold breath against the back of her neck. Leave, or you will never leave. Her breath caught in her throat as the words echoed in her mind. She didn't understand. What was this place? What was happening? Was this some kind of joke, some twisted game? Or was this something far worse? Before she could make sense of the situation, the shadow surged forward again. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow. It was a presence, a dark, formless figure that seemed to rise from the floor itself. Laura's heart raced as the figure grew, stretching and expanding until it towered over her, its shape a grotesque distortion of what she could comprehend. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and Laura's throat tightened, the smell suffocating her. The figure loomed over her, its features becoming clearer, yet more horrifying with each passing second. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were nothing but voids, dark and endless. They stared down at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. What do you want from me? She thought, her mind struggling to make sense of the terror before her. It didn't answer. Instead, it reached out toward her with a twisted, clawed hand, its fingers moving like tendrils of smoke. Laura screamed and tried to back away, but she was trapped. The room felt like it was closing in on her, the walls pressing inward, suffocating her. In a frantic panic, she yanked at the door handle again. This time, it gave way. She stumbled into the hallway, her legs weak, her mind reeling. The door slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. Laura leaned against the door, gasping for air, her heart hammering in her chest. She could still hear the whispers, the soft hiss of the figure's voice, even though she was no longer in that room. They were following her, the whispers. They were in her head, in the air, lingering, threatening to pull her back. She knew one thing now. There was something alive in this house, something old and dangerous, something that didn't want her there. And no matter how far she ran, no matter how hard she tried to escape, it wasn't going to let her go. Not unless she figured out why it was there. The house loomed behind her, dark and foreboding. Laura's breath came in shallow gasps as she stood on the edge of the front porch, her mind struggling to piece together the surreal experience she had just endured. The door she had slammed shut behind her felt like a thin barrier between the world she thought she knew and the nightmare that now clawed at her thoughts. She couldn't go back inside. Not yet. She wasn't ready to confront whatever dark presence lurked within the walls of that house. Her mind raced, replaying the events over and over again. The shadows that moved, the whispering voice. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. What was it? What was that thing she had seen? And why had it singled her out? A sharp shiver ran down her spine, the memories of the dark figure still vivid in her mind. It wasn't just a shadow, it was something ancient, something that had been waiting for her. But why? She took a shaky step back, her eyes scanning the dark, overgrown yard. The air felt heavy, like the earth itself was holding its breath. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The rustling of the wind in the trees, the eerie stillness of the night, it all felt too unnatural. Laura glanced at the house again. The windows staring back at her like dark, unblinking eyes. She thought about going to the police, about telling someone, anyone, what had happened. But something held her back. A deep, unshakable sense of dread. She knew they wouldn't believe her. And if they did, would they be able to help her? No. She couldn't go to them. She had to figure this out on her own. She had to uncover what was hidden in the house, the secret that was locked away beneath the dust and cobwebs. Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound. A low, grinding noise, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Her heart skipped a beat. Had someone broken into the house? She quickly turned around and started toward the front door. But before she could reach it, the noise stopped. She stood there, frozen in place, waiting for something more, waiting for the next sign. But nothing came. The house was silent again. Was she just imagining things? She didn't know, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That something, someone, was out there, lurking in the shadows. She pulled herself together, trying to suppress the creeping fear that threatened to overwhelm her. It wasn't just the figure that terrified her, it was the silence that followed. That deep, suffocating quiet that seemed to swallow everything around her. She opened the door slowly, the creak of the hinges almost deafening in the stillness. Stepping back into the house felt like stepping into the mouth of a beast. Something ancient, hungry, and waiting to devour her. The hallway was exactly as she had left it, unchanged. But everything felt different. The air was colder now, the darkness more oppressive. She took a deep breath and forced herself to walk forward. The living room, the kitchen, everything felt wrong. Even the familiar creaks of the floorboards seemed to echo with a different tone, like the house was mocking her, reminding her of its power. Laura moved quickly, trying to ignore the feeling of eyes on her as she made her way toward the stairs. The shadows seemed to gather, stretching out from the corners of the rooms, crawling along the walls like living things. The whispers, too, were back, faint at first, then louder, more insistent. She couldn't make out the words, but she could feel their meaning deep in her bones. "Leave. You should have left," she shuddered, her footsteps faltering. The voices weren't just in her head. They were coming from the house itself, from the very walls, the floors, the ceiling. Who was speaking to her? She reached the top of the stairs and paused, her eyes drawn to the dark door at the end of the hallway. The one she had seen before. The door that had been locked when she tried to open it earlier. It was slightly ajar now, as though inviting her to enter. A chill ran through her. She knew she had to go in. There was something in there, something that had been waiting for her to return. Why was she doing this? Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the door, the whispers growing louder with every step. She pushed the door open slowly, half expecting it to slam shut in her face again. But this time it stayed open, revealing a room that seemed even darker than before. Her pulse quickened as she stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, decay, and something else. Something metallic. The room was sparsely furnished, with only an old, rickety wooden desk in the corner, and a chair that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Dust hung in the air, swirling with every breath she took. And then she saw it. On the desk, partially obscured by shadows, was a small, old book. Its cover was tattered, the pages yellowed with age. Laura's curiosity overpowered her fear as she reached out to pick it up. It was surprisingly heavy, like it was made of something more than paper. She opened the book, flipping through the brittle pages. The handwriting was jagged and uneven, as though it had been written by someone in a hurry, someone desperate. She stopped at a page that was covered in strange symbols. Runes, sigils, whatever they were. They were unlike anything she had ever seen before. As she stared at the symbols, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The room seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, vibrating with an intensity that made her head spin. What was this? The questions swirled in her mind, but the answers eluded her. She scanned the page again, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar symbols. And then, just as she thought she understood, the book began to tremble in her hands. A deep, guttural growl echoed from somewhere behind her, sending a jolt of terror through her. Her heart raced as she whipped around, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. But there was nothing there, nothing but shadows. The growl grew louder, more insistent, until it was a roar that rattled the very foundations of the house. The shadows on the walls writhed, twisting and turning like something alive, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, the room plunged into complete darkness. And then she heard it, soft at first, but growing louder with every passing second. A voice. "You shouldn't have opened it." The words sent a cold shiver through her body. The voice wasn't human. It was low, guttural, as though it had come from something ancient, something that had been buried deep beneath the earth for centuries. And as the voice whispered those words, Laura realized with horrifying clarity, the house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it was waiting for her. The darkness pressed in on Laura like a heavy, suffocating blanket, its cold fingers wrapping around her chest. She could no longer see the book in her hands. Its weight felt strangely oppressive, as if it had grown heavier. The whispers were still there, low and ominous, lingering in the air like smoke. The growl had stopped, but the silence that followed felt worse. An unnatural stillness that was almost palpable. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to steady herself, but it was impossible to find any comfort in the pitch black. Every creak of the house, every groan of the floorboards beneath her feet only seemed to deepen the sense of something waiting, something watching. Her fingers tightened around the book, as if it could anchor her to reality, as if it could protect her from the unseen terror that loomed just beyond the edge of her senses. But the darkness swallowed everything, every detail, every sound, every shred of her courage. And then, suddenly, a faint glow began to emerge in the center of the room. Laura's heart leapt into her throat. The light was dim at first, like a firefly caught in the distance, but it grew brighter, sharper, its edges flickering like the dying embers of a long, forgotten flame. She could feel its pull, its warmth in the cold air, and she instinctively stepped toward it, despite the caution that whispered in her mind. As she moved closer, the glow began to take shape, illuminating something that made her blood run cold. A figure, cloaked in shadow, standing in the center of the room. It was tall, its form indistinct, its features obscured by the very darkness it seemed to command. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if the room itself were holding its breath. And then it spoke. "You should not have come," it said, its voice a low, reverberating whisper that seemed to crawl beneath her skin. The words were clear, but there was an ancient, guttural undertone to them, something that resonated with a terrifying finality. Laura froze, her blood turning to ice. She wanted to speak, to scream, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the thing's gaze, though she couldn't see its eyes, pressed down on her like 1,000 pounds, suffocating her. "You don't belong here," it continued, its voice rising with a sharp edge of anger. "This place is not for the living, and neither are you." A scream built in Laura's throat, but before it could escape, the figure stepped forward. The light around it pulsed violently, growing so intense that she had to shield her eyes. When she lowered her hands, it was no longer just a figure. It was a shape, a form that moved in ways that defied all logic. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and it seemed to float above the ground, its feet not quite touching the floor. The room seemed to distort, bending at the edges as the creature advanced. Its outline shimmered, constantly shifting, like smoke caught in the wind. And then the room seemed to shudder, as if the entire house itself were groaning in pain. The shadows that had been lingering along the walls surged toward the figure, swirling around it like a living, breathing mass. The darkness coalesced, and the figure seemed to absorb it, growing larger, more terrifying with every passing second. The light flickered again, dimming before flaring bright once more. Laura blinked, her vision swimming as the creature grew nearer. And then it spoke again, its voice not a whisper this time, but a roar that seemed to come from every corner of the house, shaking the very foundations. "Leave now," it commanded, its voice echoing in her head. Before it is too late. Before she could react, the light disappeared, plunging the room back into total darkness. She stumbled backward, her legs giving way beneath her. She fell to the floor with a thud, the book slipping from her hands. The shadows closed in, pressing against her skin, suffocating her, until she thought she might be consumed by them entirely. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the pressure lifted. The room was silent again. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air had vanished, leaving only the faintest trace of fear behind. Laura lay on the floor, gasping for air, her heart still pounding in her chest. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs felt like lead. What had just happened? What was that thing? Her eyes darted around the room, but there was no sign of the creature. No sign of anything. The house was still. Too still. The book lay where she had dropped it, its cover catching the faint light from the hallway outside. It was then that Laura noticed something new. The room felt different now. It wasn't just the silence. The air was thicker, heavier, as though something had changed in the very fabric of the house itself. Something had shifted. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if they were breathing. Alive in a way that defied all logic. She crawled toward the book, her hands trembling as she reached for it. She could feel the weight of its pages in her palms, the ancient paper crackling beneath her fingers. The room seemed to close in around her as she opened it once more. But this time, the symbols on the pages were different. The writing had changed. The symbols that had once been incomprehensible now seemed to shift and move, forming patterns that danced before her eyes. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized that she could now read them. The house chooses its own. The words were etched in jagged, desperate handwriting, the ink smudged as though the writer had been frantic, running out of time. The living are not welcome. Her eyes darted to the next page, her fingers flipping quickly through the brittle paper. There was something familiar about the symbols, something that tugged at her memory. She stopped at a page that was covered in more of the strange writing, but this time it was different. The words weren't just warnings, they were instructions. When the door is open, you cannot leave. A cold chill washed over her. The words felt like a curse, an ancient pact made long before she had ever stepped foot in this house. She had thought it was just an old book, a relic from a forgotten past. But now, she understood. This book was part of the house. It was alive, just like the house, and she was trapped. The truth was clearer now. But it was more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The house wasn't haunted. It wasn't simply old and broken. It was alive, and it had been waiting for her. And if she wanted to leave, she would have to face something far worse than the shadowy figure that had appeared in the dark. She would have to confront the house itself. The cold in the room was unbearable, yet Laura couldn't bring herself to leave. She sat frozen in place, the book heavy in her hands, the words haunting her. The house chooses its own. Her breath felt shallow, each exhale forming a mist in the air as she tried to steady herself. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to run far away from this cursed place, but something deeper kept her rooted to the spot. She had come this far, too far, and she couldn't let whatever dark force ruled this house win. Not yet. The whispers hadn't stopped. In fact, they seemed to grow louder as she read those cursed words. She glanced around the room, her heart hammering in her chest, her eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. The same unsettling, oppressive silence hung in the air, but now it was tinged with an ominous sense of awareness. The house was watching her. It was aware of her. She had awoken something that was not meant to be disturbed. The book felt impossibly heavy in her hands as she flipped through its pages, each one revealing more and more cryptic symbols and terrifying messages. The door is a trap. Once open, it can never be closed again. The house waits for the willing. Each new page only added to the gnawing dread in her gut. But one particular page caught her attention. Its ink a dark crimson red that seemed to bleed into the fabric of the paper. There were words written in a frantic scrawl, barely legible, as if written by someone in a feverish, desperate state. Find the heart of the house. Destroy the key that binds it. The words echoed in her mind. The heart of the house. What did it mean? Where could she find it? And how could she possibly destroy something that was alive? Something that was as old as the very walls that surrounded her. The house itself was the key. It was alive, and it had been waiting for her. For a moment, she thought about the shadowy figure that had warned her to leave. Could it have been trying to help her? Or was it a part of the house, too? Something else, something far darker, was lurking here, controlling everything. She stood up slowly, the book still in her trembling hands. The shadows that had once seemed so distant were now closer, swirling in the corners of her vision, pushing in from every side. There was no escape, not unless she figured out the truth of what was happening. And the truth, as it had become painfully clear, was buried in the house's history. Laura's mind raced, turning over every clue she had gathered since stepping into the house. The strange whispers, the locked doors, the shifting shadows, everything seemed to point toward one thing. The heart of the house. Whatever it was the key to ending this nightmare. But where was it? Her eyes landed on the floor beneath her, the polished wood glinting in the dim light. She noticed something strange, something out of place. A small crack in the floorboards, barely noticeable, but enough to draw her attention. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this another clue? Was this where the truth lay? She crouched down and ran her fingers over the crack, feeling the rough edges of the wood. She pressed down, but it didn't give. The whispers were back, now louder than ever. Find it before it finds you. The voice seemed to come from all around her, echoing in her mind. Laura's hand trembled as she pulled at the floorboard. It wasn't easy. The wood resisted, creaking loudly as she tried to pry it loose. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she pushed with all her strength. Finally, with a sharp crack, the board gave way. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pried the board free, revealing the space beneath it, a hidden compartment. She reached into the darkness, her fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. A small, ornate box, its surface covered in strange, intricate symbols that matched those in the book. The moment her fingers touched the box, the room seemed to vibrate. The walls groaned as if the house itself were waking up, becoming aware of the intrusion. With trembling hands, Laura lifted the box out of the compartment. It was surprisingly heavy. Almost too heavy for something so small. The metal was cold to the touch, and the symbols etched into its surface seemed to glow faintly, as though reacting to her presence. Her mind raced as she examined the box, wondering if this was the key to unlocking the mystery of the house. The symbols on the box matched those she had seen in the book. There was no mistaking it now. This box was important. It was the link to whatever dark force was controlling this house. She didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at her to leave it alone, to walk away before the house consumed her completely. But the compulsion to know the truth, to understand what was happening, was too strong. She had to open it. Slowly, cautiously, she lifted the lid. The moment the lid opened, a rush of cold air swept through the room. The temperature dropped dramatically, and Laura's breath fogged in front of her face. A dark mist began to spill from the box, swirling around her like a cloud of smoke. Her pulse quickened as the mist began to coalesce into something. Something more? The shadows seemed to come alive, stretching and wreathing as though they were being drawn toward the mist. The room trembled, the very floor beneath her feet shuddering with an unnatural force. Then, the mist formed into a shape. No, a figure. It was tall, its form barely discernible through the swirling darkness, but it was there, moving toward her with an unmistakable presence. Laura stumbled back, her hands shaking, but her feet wouldn't obey. She was rooted to the spot, trapped by the force that seemed to emanate from the figure. The figure stepped forward, its form shifting and flickering like a candle's flame. The shadows twisted around it, pulling at the air itself, as if the figure were absorbing everything in its path. And then, the figure spoke. "You have opened the door, Laura." The voice was deep, malevolent, and resonated with power. It wasn't a human voice, it was something far older. Something that had existed long before Laura's time, before the house had been built. "You were chosen to open it." The figure continued, its voice seeping into her very soul. "You were meant to find the heart." Laura's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, the box slipping from her hands and landing with a dull thud. The room seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in as the figure loomed over her. Its form began to solidify, revealing more details. Its face, or what passed for a face, was a mass of writhing shadows, its eyes empty voids. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her mouth felt dry, her throat tight, as the figure reached out toward her. Its hand was long, twisted, and covered in dark tendrils that seemed to reach for her with a mind of their own. This was it. She had uncovered the heart of the house. But it was too late to escape. The figure loomed over Laura, its form shifting and twisting in the dim light of the room. The shadows that clung to it seemed to have a life of their own, swirling around like a storm contained in the shape of something humanoid. It was not merely a creature, but an embodiment of something ancient, something that had lived far longer than the house itself. The air grew colder with every passing second, and Laura could feel it deep in her bones. The presence of something so old, so powerful, that even the house seemed to bow to it. "You should never have come." The figure's voice rumbled, echoing through the room, resonating in her chest. It wasn't just a voice, it was a vibration, a feeling that she could hear, taste, and even touch. Laura trembled, her heart racing, but she couldn't move. The figure's hand stretched out toward her, its long, twisted fingers curling in the air like the limbs of a spider. A sickening pressure pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Do you understand now?" The figure whispered, its voice low and drawn out like the wind through a graveyard. "You are not the first to seek answers in this house. Many before you have tried, and many before you have failed." Laura's mind raced. She could hear the whispers now. A cacophony of voices, each one distant and despairing, all trapped within the house. She wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but she couldn't. It was as if the very air had conspired to suffocate her. The figure's shadowed form seemed to consume the room, the walls around her darkening further as it drew closer. Her vision blurred, and the faint glow from the opened box flickered in her peripheral, casting a faint, eerie light on the surrounding chaos. Her hands, still trembling, reached for the floor, scraping against the wooden boards. Her fingers brushed the now empty box, and a shudder ran through her body. The lid was still open, but it was no longer just a box. It was an anchor, a link between the world she knew and the ancient force that resided in the heart of the house. "Tell me," the figure hissed. "What makes you think you can stop it? What makes you think you can escape?" Laura's pulse thundered in her ears as she struggled to form a coherent thought, but fear clouded everything. Her eyes widened, a realization dawning on her. She had opened the box. She had found the heart. She had followed the trail to this very moment. But it was a trap she could never have imagined. As the figure's hand reached for her, something inside Laura snapped. She couldn't explain it, but in that moment, something deep within her stirred, something primal. A fierce defiance that she had never known she possessed. She could feel the pull of the house, the weight of its ancient power, but she also felt something else, something stronger. The desperation to survive. Without thinking, her hands shot out and slammed the book shut. The figure froze. For the briefest moment, the air stilled. The dark energy that had filled the room seemed to hesitate, as if the house itself was confused by the action. The shadows quivered, flickering like a flame threatened by wind, and the oppressive pressure that had been choking her chest lifted slightly. The figure's hollow eyes glowed with fury. "No, no," it growled, the voice trembling with rage. "You do not understand. You cannot stop it." With a violent motion, it lunged toward her, its fingers like talons reaching for her throat. The shadows blurred, a sudden flash of motion, and the figure's hand closed around her. But as it made contact, Laura's body convulsed violently, as if some hidden force was pushing back. A sharp, stinging pain erupted from the base of her spine, spreading outward through her limbs. Suddenly, she saw it. Not with her eyes, but with something deeper, something within her soul. A vision, flickering like an old film. She was inside the house, but not as she was now. She saw the walls crumble, saw the house in its infancy, a site of birth and rebirth, where shadows were born from the earth itself. She saw people, many people, perhaps hundreds, filling the rooms, their faces full of hope, unaware of what the house truly was. They had come to this place searching for refuge, seeking shelter from a world that had no place for them. And the house had offered them that sanctuary. But the price had been steep. Laura saw the heart of the house, hidden deep beneath the floorboards, nestled in the roots of the earth, its power pulsing like a heartbeat. It had been feeding on the souls of those who entered, taking them, binding them to its dark power. The house had always been hungry. It had always needed more. She saw the one who had built it, an ancient being who had once been human, now lost to time, bound by the very house they had created. This being, the first of many, had made a pact with the house, offering their soul in exchange for immortality. They had become the first shadow, the first servant, and the heart of the house. Laura snapped out of the vision, gasping for air, her head pounding. The figure was still before her, its fingers wrapped tightly around her neck, but it wasn't the same. Something had shifted. She realized with a jolt of horror that the house was not just alive, it was a prison. The heart of the house, buried deep in its foundation, was the force that held all those who had ever come here captive. Those who had entered seeking refuge, seeking answers, were never allowed to leave. They became part of the house, part of the dark, unending hunger that sustained it. The shadow that stood before her was not an entity, not a creature of flesh and blood. It was a part of the house itself, and it had been waiting for her. In that moment of clarity, Laura understood the truth. The book, the symbols, the whispers, they were all part of a ritual, a spell that had been woven into the very fabric of the house. The heart was not just a physical object, it was a living, breathing essence that existed within the walls, the floors, the very foundation. It was the pulse of the house. It was both the trap and the key. Laura knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to fight the figure. She wasn't going to run. No. She would destroy the heart. With one final surge of will, she summoned every ounce of strength within her. She ripped herself from the figure's grip, feeling a surge of pain shoot through her body as she did. The shadows shrieked, the air pulsing with a strange, electric tension. Her mind raced, but she had no time to think. She reached for the book, clutched it in her hands, and pressed it to her chest. "I will destroy you," she whispered, her voice full of a newfound certainty. In that moment, the room shook, and the house itself seemed to howl in rage. Laura felt the floor beneath her tremble, the walls vibrating with an intensity she could not explain. The shadows screamed, a high, pitched wail that filled her ears and rattled her bones. The book pulsed in her hands, the symbols on its pages glowing brightly, burning her skin. And then, with a deafening crack, everything around her exploded into darkness. The darkness enveloped Laura completely, an inky blackness so deep that it felt as though it were consuming the very air from her lungs. For a long moment, there was no sound, no light, just a heavy, suffocating void pressing against her, pulling her deeper and deeper. She felt as though she were falling through an endless chasm, but there was no ground beneath her, no sense of direction. Her body felt weightless, her mind a swirl of confusion and panic. She had destroyed the heart. She had destroyed the book. The words had burned into her skin. The symbols had cracked and split. And yet, there was no victory, no relief. The darkness felt endless. It wasn't a place, it was nothingness, the complete absence of everything she knew. Her chest heaved in desperation, trying to take in air that wasn't there. But then, slowly, the void shifted. A ripple in the darkness, a glimmer of something, broke through the blackness. At first, it was faint, just a pinprick of light, as if something was coming toward her from a far-off distance. But it wasn't enough. The more she tried to focus on it, the more it seemed to retreat into the void. She reached out, her body jerking with the effort, but there was nothing solid to grab. Her hands flailed in desperation. The whispers returned. Soft at first, like distant murmurs, and then louder, closer. More insistent. "You cannot leave. You are one of us now." Laura's heart clenched in her chest. The voice wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the shadow's voice. It was something else, something darker, deeper. The voices in the darkness twisted around her like 100 fingers digging into her skin, clawing at her consciousness. She could feel them, the countless souls who had been trapped here, their despair and suffering pressing against her like an invisible weight. She could feel their anguish, their helplessness. Her mind struggled to grasp what was happening. She was still inside the house, but it wasn't the house as she had known it. It wasn't even the same world. The walls had vanished. The air was thick with the bitter taste of rot and decay. She wasn't just trapped in a room anymore. She was trapped in the very essence of the house, in its soul. This is not the end. The words filled her mind with a sickening clarity. And then, without warning, the darkness split open like a wound, and she was falling. But she didn't land. She didn't feel the floor beneath her feet. Instead, she felt the sensation of movement, like being pulled through something. She blinked, but her eyes didn't seem to work in this place. It wasn't just darkness around her anymore. It was more like nothingness, a void without dimension or shape. She couldn't tell if she was rising or sinking or spinning. Then, as suddenly as the void had appeared, light came crashing into her vision. It was blinding, pure, and scorching hot. The sudden change was enough to send her into a momentary panic. She squeezed her eyes shut, her hands pressing to her face as the light grew more intense. But it didn't blind her for long. The light shifted, dimming slowly until it became a soft, glowing haze. When she dared to open her eyes again, she found herself standing in a room. It was familiar but wrong. The room was the same room where she had found the book. The same room where she had opened the heart of the house. But now, everything was different. The walls seemed to pulse, like they were breathing. The air was thick with a strange energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The shadows in the corners of the room didn't just linger. They moved. They stirred. And then she saw it. In the center of the room, where once the book had lain, now stood an object. It was a pedestal, old and worn, its surface carved with the same symbols as the book, as the box, as the house itself. But there was something more. On the pedestal, a heart beat. It was the same heart she had destroyed. It throbbed with a sickening pulse, dark veins stretching and writhing beneath its surface like something alive. The very air around it seemed to distort. the walls warping in response to its presence. The heart was no longer just a symbol of the house's power. It was the house. It was its soul, its core. Laura's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. The heart wasn't gone. It hadn't been destroyed. It had only been changed. And now, it was here, in this space that seemed to exist outside of time and place, in a space where the very fabric of reality had been twisted by the house's insidious power. The heart continued to beat, slowly and steadily, its pulse echoing in her ears. With each throb, she could feel it reaching into her, digging into her very essence. It was like a magnet pulling at her soul, drawing her closer to it. Her body trembled, and she instinctively took a step back. But it was no use. The house had control. It had always had control. And now it was calling to her, beckoning her to come closer. The whispers returned, louder than ever, a chorus of voices. But this time, they weren't just the tortured souls of those who had entered the house before her. No, these voices were hers. You are the one. You are the heart's successor. You will become the house. Her eyes widened in horror. No, she had fought this. She had come this far. She couldn't be part of this nightmare. She couldn't let herself become one with the house. But the darkness, the hunger, was too much. It consumed her thoughts, drowned out her resistance. The heartbeat, steady and insistent, resonated within her chest, filling her with an overwhelming urge to step forward. Her body moved without her consent, her legs carrying her toward the pedestal as if some invisible force were guiding her. The shadows twisted around her, coiling like serpents, their whispers louder, more insistent. Come closer. Embrace the heart. Become the house. The moment she touched the pedestal, the world around her shifted. The room disappeared, and the house was everywhere. It was inside her mind, inside her body. She could feel its pulse, her pulse, flowing through her veins, its whispers crawling into her soul. She was no longer just a visitor. She was part of it. The house had consumed her, and she had become the house. The heartbeat slowed. The shadows whispered their final, chilling message. It is done. And as the last whisper faded, Laura was no more. The air was still, suffocatingly so, as Laura's eyes fluttered open. Her body felt strange, heavy, almost foreign, as if she were waking up in someone else's skin. The room, the heart, the pedestal, all of it was gone, and yet it wasn't. The pulse of the house still echoed within her, reverberating through her bones like a heartbeat she couldn't escape. It wasn't a rhythm she could control. It was as if it was her now. She tried to move, but her limbs felt sluggish, disconnected. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one dragging her back to the present, to the room where the shadows had once surrounded her. But now, there was nothing. No pedestal. No pulsating heart. No walls or floor. It was as if she were suspended in the void once more, an endless, suffocating blackness that stretched beyond the boundaries of time and space. Her mind raced as she tried to grasp what had happened. Had she become part of the house? Was she trapped in the same way those who had come before her had been? A part of its soul, forever bound to its darkness. Her body shuddered with the realization, but then, faintly, in the distance, she heard something. A whisper. At first, it was just a sound in the blackness, a murmur that seemed too far away to make sense of. But then, the whisper grew louder, more insistent. You cannot run. The voice was deep and guttural, like it was coming from the very walls of the house itself. But it wasn't quite the same voice she had heard before. It was different, deeper, more ancient. Laura swallowed hard, trying to force the thoughts away. She was not the house. She wasn't some vessel for its dark power. She had to find a way out. She had to... But then she felt it. The pulse. It was inside her chest now. The heartbeat that had once come from the heart on the pedestal was now her own, beating in rhythm with the ancient rhythm of the house. She could feel it in the very core of her being. It was her blood, her breath. It was her essence. And with every beat, she could feel the house's power stirring within her, shifting, waiting for her to do something with it. You are the heart now. The voice whispered again, louder this time, closer, like it was pressing against her mind. It is done, and you are one with it. And now you will feed it. The words were a command. They were more than just a voice. They were a force, pulling her, twisting her thoughts. She tried to fight it, to shake it off, but the force of the house was too strong. It was as if she was no longer just herself. She was it. The shadows, the hunger, the pull of the house. It was all inside her. An unholy union of spirit and stone, of flesh and dark power. A cold chill gripped her heart, a sharp pang of regret cutting through her. But it was fleeting. It didn't matter. She wasn't Laura anymore. She was the house. A dark energy swelled inside her, growing with each passing second, until she could feel the walls of her consciousness cracking under the strain. The house wanted more. It wanted her to give in, to become the center of its power, the heart that would feed it. And then, just as quickly as the weight of it all had taken hold of her, she saw something, a flicker in the darkness, a shape, a figure, no, a person. A figure she knew. It was a reflection, a memory. It was her. Laura. But it wasn't. The figure was different now, changed, twisted by the darkness, by the house. It wasn't the same woman she remembered. She could feel the difference, the emptiness that now filled the reflection. She was staring at herself, but it was as if the reflection was staring back at her, mocking her. The figure opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Then, the silence was broken by a soft, sickening crack, like bones shifting and breaking, and a deep growl rose from the depths of the void. "You are mine now," the voice said, but it was her voice. It was Laura's voice, but distorted, guttural. "You will be the one who feeds me." The words hit her like a hammer. Her vision blurred as the figure's image morphed, becoming something else entirely. A creature that was both human and shadow, twisted into something grotesque. The reflection seemed to reach out to her, its arms stretching unnaturally long, its hands clawing through the darkness as if trying to pull her in. Laura screamed. No, she tried to scream, but the sound died in her throat, choked off by the overwhelming force of the house. She felt it, that hunger, deep in her gut. She wasn't alone anymore. The house had entered her, had taken her, and it wanted her to give more. The pulse quickened. The heartbeat inside her chest sped up, growing faster and louder with every passing second, drowning out her thoughts, drowning out her will to resist. "You will take more." The voice whispered, its tone satisfied. "You will feed." Her body jerked involuntarily as she tried to stop it, to fight the urge to feed, but she could feel the house inside her, pushing her forward. The hunger was all-consuming. It was no longer just the house that was alive. It was her too. She was now one with the darkness, and the darkness was now one with her. The walls of the void around her began to shift again, but this time it wasn't the house. It was her, shifting, molding into something else. Something monstrous. She felt the power swelling inside her, and with that power came a terrifying truth. The house had not only consumed her, it had replaced her. Laura was no more. She had become part of the house, part of the very foundation, a new heart to fuel its insatiable hunger. "It is your turn now," the voice said, echoing in her ears, the walls of the house closing in around her. "You will become what they all became. You will take their souls, just as I did with yours." Laura's vision blurred, and in the distance, she saw them. Others. Their faces were distorted by time and darkness, their bodies twisted and worn by the centuries of feeding. They were her now, and she was them. 1,000 shadows, all bound together in this one soul. Her soul. The house was no longer just a place. It was a being, and she was its new heart. Her reflection in the void smiled. A dark, hollow smile, filled with the ancient knowledge of the house. And with that smile, the house's pulse stopped. The darkness consumed everything, and Laura was no more. The silence was deafening. For a moment, Laura, or whatever she had become, couldn't tell where she was. Was this still the house? Was this still the place she had once known, or had she crossed over into something else entirely? Something far worse. The oppressive darkness had receded, but a low hum filled the air, a vibration that seemed to resonate in every part of her new existence. The heartbeat was gone, but the pull remained, a subtle tug at her soul, beckoning her toward something she couldn't understand. She was different. Not just in body, but in essence. She could feel it now, the knowledge, the hunger, the ancient power that coursed through her veins. The house's pulse was in her, alive and hungry, just as it had been in the walls and floors. But now, it was her heart, beating in rhythm with the house itself. And then, she saw them. They were everywhere, in the corners of her vision, figures standing, hovering, waiting in the dark, their features barely visible in the shadows. They were the lost ones, the souls of those who had come before her, their bodies twisted, their faces stretched by years of torment. She could feel them, each one, bound to her, to the house, just as she was now. They were part of the void that she had become, an eternal echo of lost lives. The reflection she had seen earlier was now more than just an image. It was her reality. She was now one of them, the ones who had fed the house, who had been consumed and replaced. Their souls mingled with the house's endless hunger. Her eyes wandered over the figures, each one more hollow than the last, each one a dark version of the person they had once been. Their eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were empty voids, their bodies stretched thin and lifeless, as if time had abandoned them long ago. They were all her now, and she was them. There was no longer a clear distinction between who she had been and who she was now. A figure stepped forward, one of the lost souls, and its hollow gaze fixed on her. The faintest flicker of recognition passed through its face, a silent understanding that this was how it had always been. The house had consumed them, and now it had consumed her. You were always meant to become this. The figure rasped, its voice a distorted echo of its former self. The house waits for those who are worthy and those who are weak. Laura recoiled, a sharp jolt of confusion and anger rushing through her. But the emptiness inside her, the gnawing hunger, squelched it quickly. The shadow had been right. She had been weak. The figure, sensing her internal struggle, smiled, if it could even be called that. The expression was twisted cruel. Embrace it. The house is you. You are the heart now, as if to drive home the point. The darkness around her seemed to grow thicker, pressing against her chest, suffocating her. The souls around her stirred, their movements stiff, unnatural. But all of them, every single one, shifted closer to her, drawn to her now that she had become the heart. The echo of their souls rang through her like a bell, a dissonant, hollow sound that made her head ache. But it wasn't just the souls that were drawn to her. It was the house itself. The walls around her, the very air, seemed to bend, to twist, as if they were alive. She could feel it now, the pulse of the house, reverberating beneath her skin, the dark hunger, the need for more. More souls, more lives to be consumed. The reflection of herself, the twisted version of Laura, watched her with eyes that were no longer hers. The reflection smiled, its face becoming more defined, more real. And it wasn't just a mirror of her. It was her, a piece of her that had broken off and become its own entity, its own shadow. This is what she had become. She had crossed into the heart of the house, and now there was no escape. There was no Laura anymore. There was only the house and its hunger, and the eternal weight of the souls that had fed it, and she was just another piece of it. The air vibrated with the house's dark energy, and suddenly, everything around her began to shift. The walls bent inward, the ceiling stretching downward, as though the house was folding in on itself. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the shadows red, swirling around her like a living thing. The figures of the lost souls around her whispered in tongues she couldn't understand, their voices rising into a cacophony of tortured cries. For a moment, she could feel it. The overwhelming urge to consume, to feed the house, to become one with it completely. The hunger gnawed at her insides, pulling at the very core of her being. But then something flickered. A thought, a memory, a glimpse of who she had been. Before the house, before the shadows, before the hunger, there had been a life. There had been moments of joy, of freedom, of choices. She remembered those moments. She remembered the sensation of being human, of being someone who could make decisions, someone who could fight. The house, the darkness, had taken so much. But there was still something left, something that hadn't yet been consumed. She wasn't just a vessel for the house. She wasn't just its heart. There was still Laura inside her. The memory ignited something inside her, a spark of defiance, a flicker of light that refused to be extinguished. She could fight it, but she had to find the will, the strength to do so. The voices of the lost souls grew louder, the darkness closing in tighter, pressing down on her chest, as if the house itself was trying to suffocate her. She could feel the pull, feel the dark energy trying to overtake her. But Laura, what was left of her, was still in there. She felt a surge of power, her power, not the house's, and with it came a whisper of hope. The souls, the shadows, the house, they were all bound together, intertwined in a way that made it impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. But that connection, that bond, was the key. Laura's hands clenched, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against the air, pulling at the threads of the darkness around her. She focused on the center of the pulse, the heart that had once been inside the house but was now her. She pulled, and then she felt it. The heart, her heart, shuddered. It was a weak pulse, but it was enough. It was enough to send a shockwave through the house. The shadows recoiled, the figures of the lost souls faltered, their presence wavering. For a moment, there was silence. An eerie, suffocating quiet. But then the walls trembled, and the house, screamed. It wasn't a sound she could hear with her ears. It wasn't something that could be described. It was a feeling that consumed her, a sensation that ripped at her very soul, as if the house itself was fighting to maintain its grip on her. But this time, Laura fought back. The house had taken so much from her. She wasn't going to let it take any more. She pulled harder, focusing all of her energy, all of her will, on severing the bond. The heartbeat inside her chest became erratic, pulsing with an intensity that made her blood boil, but she didn't stop. The house trembled again, the walls cracking, the ceiling buckling. The figure of herself, the twisted reflection, howled in frustration, its form breaking apart as the power of the house began to unravel. The darkness screamed one last time, and then it stopped. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was quiet, a stillness that was unlike any she had ever known. The pulse was gone, the hunger was silent, and in the absence of the house's heartbeat, there was a new sound, her own. The silence was overwhelming. It was as if the entire world had come to a sudden and absolute halt, frozen in time, no heartbeat, no whispering shadows, no flickering darkness. Laura stood in the center of the void, her breath slow and shallow as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The house, the heart, the twisted reflection of herself had all collapsed into stillness. For a brief moment, it felt as though she were alone in an infinite emptiness. She glanced down at her hands, the fingers trembling ever so slightly. Her body, though no longer weighed down by the hunger of the house, still felt strange. Heavy in a way that was almost unnatural. She was still here, still in this space that had become her prison. but the oppressive pull of the house was gone. The pulse had stopped, and with it, the house's grip on her had loosened. But was it really gone? Was she free? For the first time in what felt like forever, Laura allowed herself to breathe deeply. The air tasted different, free from the thick, suffocating darkness that had clouded her senses. It was pure, clear, untainted. And with that first breath came a surge of clarity, a sudden, overwhelming understanding. She had done it. She had severed the connection. She had unraveled the heart of the house. But the questions were endless now. What did that mean for her? What had she become in the process? And most importantly, could she leave? Was there any escape from this place, or was she now bound to it forever? Just another lost soul caught in the web of the house's insidious grip. Her gaze flickered back to the space around her. The darkness, though less suffocating, still clung to the edges of her vision, like smoke that would not disperse. The room, or what remained of it, was distorted, the very walls bending and stretching in a way that defied logic. It was as if the house itself was no longer bound by the same rules that governed the world she had once known. Laura took a tentative step forward, her footfall echoing eerily in the stillness. The sound felt alien, like she was intruding upon something ancient, something that was not meant to be disturbed. But the ground beneath her feet was solid, unyielding. There was no more trembling, no more shifting. For a moment, it almost felt as though she was walking through the remains of a dream. Where do I go from here? The thought echoed in her mind, bouncing against the walls of her fractured consciousness. She had fought so hard to sever the connection, to escape the clutches of the house. But in doing so, had she freed herself, or simply made herself a part of the void? The questions continued to gnaw at her. Her mind raced, but as her thoughts circled like a whirlpool, a chilling realization crept up from the corners of her awareness. She wasn't alone. The realization struck her like a slap to the face. She whirled around, her heart leaping into her throat, but the room remained empty. No figures, no twisted reflections, nothing. Yet, the feeling of being watched was undeniable. There was something else here, something that had always been here. Something she had never truly understood until now. The house wasn't just alive, it was a reflection of the souls it had consumed. It was the souls that lived within it. Laura's breath hitched in her throat as she began to piece it all together. The house had taken her. It had consumed her, twisted her, and bound her to its heart. But she hadn't been alone in that process. The house had taken countless others, had devoured their souls, their very essences, and turned them into shadows, into twisted fragments of the place itself. And now, she pressed a hand to her chest, where she could still feel the faintest echo of the house's pulse. Her heartbeat, slow and steady now, was her own again, but there was something else beneath it. A faint thrum of something that pulsed in rhythm with the beat of her heart. The house, its essence, had become part of her. She could feel it now, beneath her skin, an ever-present reminder of what she had become. The lost souls were still with her. They were inside her, and they were waiting. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper drifted into her ears, so quiet that she wondered for a moment if it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But then it grew louder, the words clearer, the voice more distinct. You will never escape. It wasn't the house speaking now. It wasn't the house's hunger. It was them. The souls that had been consumed. That had become a part of the house's insatiable desire. And now they were reaching out from within her, their whispers threading through her consciousness like spider silk. The sound was maddening. The more she tried to push it away, the louder it became. Their voices, hundreds, thousands, echoed in her mind, calling to her, tugging at the very core of her being. They weren't just voices anymore. They were thoughts, emotions, memories. You are us. You will feed us. We are the house. It was like a storm building inside her, the torrent of voices crashing against her thoughts, trying to take control. The realization hit her with a sickening clarity. They were no longer trapped in the house. They were inside her, and now they had control. For a fleeting moment, she felt her mind begin to unravel. The voices, so many voices, so many souls, began to consume her, drowning her in the weight of their collective despair, their sorrow, their rage. She fought the pull, but it was like trying to fight the tide with a broken oar. But then, just as quickly, she felt the smallest spark of rebellion, the last vestige of herself. In that moment, the pulse inside her quickened, thrumming with a new rhythm. Her heartbeat, slow and steady, fought against the flood of the souls inside her, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't let them take her. She couldn't let them win. For the first time since the house had consumed her, Laura understood what she had to do. She couldn't escape. But maybe, just maybe, she could destroy it. And with that thought, the storm inside her began to settle. It wasn't over yet. The world around Laura seemed to pulse in time with her heart. The moment she realized the souls were inside her, that they had become a part of her, her world seemed to shift once more. The darkness that had once suffocated her now felt different. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the presence of something else, something alive, an energy that was growing, swirling within her chest like a storm waiting to break free. She could feel the thousands of voices pushing against her mind, each one desperate, angry, or pleading. They all wanted control. They wanted her to give in to the house, to become nothing more than an echo, a reflection of what had come before. But something deep within her refused. She couldn't let it happen again. She couldn't become another lost soul in the house's eternal hunger. The pulse inside her quickened once more, and with it came a rush of clarity. She could feel it. The very heart of the house was still within her. But now she controlled it. The house no longer held sway over her. She was the heart now. She wasn't just going to destroy the house. She was going to tear it apart. For the first time, Laura felt a sense of power that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The dark energy coursing through her was no longer something she feared. It was hers. The hunger was no longer a force outside of her. It was an impulse, a choice, a will that she could bend to her own desire. And now, she could break it. The whispers of the souls inside her had grown louder, more frantic, but now Laura silenced them, focusing all of her will on the pulse in her chest. She felt the house's power, the very fabric of the dark energy that bound it together. The souls had always been tied to it, tied to her, but they were not the force behind it. The house had been feeding off them, taking their essence and storing it within its walls. But now, the power was hers. She could feel the pulse of the house, the heartbeat that had once been so steady, so constant, shaking, faltering. It was weakening. It was crumbling under the weight of her defiance. Laura's hands shook as she reached out, her fingers splayed, pushing against the air as if trying to grasp the very threads that held the house together. She could feel them, the threads, intertwined, woven together with the souls, the darkness, the ancient energy that powered the house. But she wasn't going to pull them apart. Not yet. First, she needed to understand. How had the house grown so powerful? The answer came, as it always did, in a flash of insight. The house had always fed. It had never stopped feeding. The souls that had come here had been drawn to it, seeking refuge from their own broken lives, from the pain they carried. They hadn't realized that the house was not a shelter. It was a trap, a place that consumed the soul and fed the hunger of something ancient and dark. The house had built itself on the backs of those who had entered, each one adding their essence to its heart, to its foundation. The longer it stood, the more it grew, feeding off the anguish, the despair, and the fear of those who had dared to enter. and now it had consumed her too. But she wasn't like the others. She wasn't going to be another lost soul in the house's never-ending hunger. Laura focused all her energy on the heart, the pulsing, twisting mass of energy that lay within her, within the house itself. The house had fed on the souls it had consumed, using them to strengthen its foundation, to build its walls, to make it stronger. But now, Laura understood. It was time to feed the house something different. Her breath grew shallow as she concentrated, her hands curling into fists as she pulled at the pulse inside her. She could feel the energy of the house resisting, fighting back, but she pushed harder, forcing her will into the very core of it. The walls around her began to tremble, their once steadfast form cracking as the pulse began to shift to break. It was working. She could feel it. The house was losing its strength. She was destroying it. The walls groaned and shuddered, the very air around her vibrating with a low hum. The dark energy that had once filled the house now twisted, recoiling from her, as if the house itself realized it was being torn apart. She could feel the darkness trying to resist, pushing against her mind, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The souls, those trapped, lost voices inside her, began to scream, their cries rising into a cacophony of anguish and fury. The more they screamed, the more the house resisted. The more it fought back. But Laura was the house now. She had become the very force that had once driven it. And she knew, deep within her soul, that the only way to truly destroy it was to confront the darkness within herself. She had to give everything. The energy inside her exploded outward, a blinding burst of power that shattered the silence. The house roared in defiance as the pulse within her cracked and splintered, sending waves of energy outward, vibrating the very foundations of the space. For a brief moment, Laura thought she might break. The force was too great, the energy too much. She felt herself slipping, her grip weakening. But then, there was a snap. The walls shattered. The house began to fall apart. A deafening crash echoed in the distance as the structure that had once been her prison began to collapse, piece by piece. The house was disintegrating. The walls, the floors, the dark energy, all of it was crumbling to dust, breaking apart in the wake of her defiance. The pulse that had once controlled everything, that had once kept the house alive, was gone. And so, too, was the house. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the voices quieted. The darkness that had once consumed her, that had once filled her every breath, was gone. The house had been destroyed, and so had she. The dust settled slowly. For a moment, there was nothing but a profound silence, deep and heavy like the end of a dream. Laura stood at the center of what had once been the house that had consumed so much of her, the house that had twisted her into something else, something far beyond the girl she had been. The walls, the shadows, the dark energy that had pulsed through every corner of the place. It was all gone. There was no longer a heartbeat to measure time by. No longer a pulse to mark her existence. The air around her was clear. The weight of the house had lifted, but the silence that followed was oppressive, cold in its emptiness. The remnants of the house, what remained of it, were little more than rubble, a crumbled shell of the darkness that had once been a living entity. Laura stood motionless, her limbs heavy, her thoughts scattered. For the first time since she had arrived, she was alone. But she was still here. She hadn't disappeared with the house. No, she had broken it. She had severed the pulse. The hunger that had once been the heartbeat of the house had died in her chest. She looked down at her hands, trying to make sense of it all. Her fingers, pale, trembling, were the same. Her body, though shaken, still felt like her own. But inside something was different. The void of the house had been filled with nothing. No hunger, no pulse, no whispering souls. And yet, in that nothingness, there was a deep, empty space. Had she won? The question echoed in her mind. She had destroyed the house, yes. She had torn apart its heart, but what had it cost her? She couldn't escape the gnawing sensation that, even though she had broken free from the darkness, it still lingered in her, deep within her. The house had been a part of her, and now she wondered if she could ever be rid of it. Laura took a deep breath, and then she stepped forward, her feet sinking slightly into the rubble beneath her. She didn't know where she was going or what would come next. She only knew that she couldn't stay here, in the ruins of the house. Whatever she was now, whatever she had become in the process, she needed to move forward. Her eyes scanned the wreckage. The ground was cracked and broken, and the air was still thick with dust. But beyond that, there was nothing. There was no sign of the house, no sign of the souls that had once filled its walls, no trace of the darkness that had filled every room, every inch of her being. But then, she felt it. A pull. It was faint at first, like a whisper at the edge of her consciousness, but it grew louder, more insistent, like the tug of an invisible thread. Her body stiffened, a chill creeping down her spine. It couldn't be, but it was. She turned her eyes, searching the emptiness, her pulse quickening. The feeling was unmistakable. The house wasn't gone. It was still there. In the distance, across the broken landscape, she saw it. The shape of the house, a faint outline at first, like a mirage in the mist. It rose from the ground, its walls flickering like shadows, as though it was being pulled back together by some unseen force. The air shimmered around it, and she could feel it, the faint pulse, the thrum of its heartbeat beginning to grow stronger. It was reforming. No. Laura whispered, her voice trembling. No, it can't be. She stumbled forward, her legs feeling weak beneath her, as if they were made of sand. The pull, that relentless force, was drawing her back to the house, back to the place that had tried to consume her. She wanted to turn and run, to flee from it once and for all, but her feet wouldn't obey. Her mind screamed at her to escape, but the house was calling, beckoning her, pulling her into its grasp. It wasn't the house that had been alive before. Not entirely. It had been the hearts of the souls that had fed it. The souls that had been twisted and bent by the darkness, their will shattered. Now, Laura understood. The house was the souls, and the souls had always been tied to the house. And she had become the new heart. The weight of that realization hit her like a wave, the understanding crashing down around her, suffocating her. The house hadn't died because she destroyed its heart. No, it hadn't died because it was never a house at all. It was a living thing, a being made of broken souls, a thing that fed and grew with each soul that entered. She had severed its heart, yes, but the souls remained. They had always remained. They had always been the true heart of the house. And now they were all inside her. The house wasn't gone because she wasn't gone. She was the new pulse, the new life that would feed the house. Even if she destroyed it, it would always come back, because it had always been a part of her, just as she had always been a part of it. The house rose from the ashes, its form slowly solidifying in the distance. It had been waiting for her to make a choice, stay or leave, and she realized with a cold certainty that there was no leaving. There would be no escape, no victory. The house had claimed her, body, mind, and soul, and now there was no way out. It was a cycle, a never-ending loop, a prison. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to break it. Laura stood still, her heart beating in time with the house's. She was part of it now. She was the pulse that fed it, the heart that would keep it alive. She wasn't just trapped inside it, she was it. And yet, there was something else. Something that she had learned in the quiet aftermath of the destruction. The house could never truly consume her, because, for the first time, she understood it. She knew its heart, its hunger, its need for more. And she knew the truth of it, its endless cycle of feeding, of consuming, of growing stronger. But now Laura had the power to choose. She could tear it apart again. But this time, it would be different. This time, she would control it. Her hand trembled, reaching out toward the house, the pulse within her growing with each passing second. She closed her eyes, focusing all her strength on the dark energy that now pulsed beneath her skin. She could feel the house's hunger, its insatiable need, but she was stronger than it now. She was the heart, and for the first time, she understood the one thing she had to do to break the cycle forever. The pulse in her chest quickened. The house responded, the walls beginning to tremble, the ground shaking beneath her feet. She wasn't going to destroy it. Not yet. She was going to control it. And in that moment, the house stopped growing. It waited. And so did she. Laura stood at the edge of the ruins, her breath steady, her mind focused. The house, or what was left of it, loomed before her, still flickering like a shadow caught between two worlds. The walls, once towering and formidable, were now broken, cracked, but the pulse, the relentless beat of its heart, was still there. It throbbed beneath her skin, filling her with a sense of connection that she couldn't escape. She was the heart. It was a truth that had settled deep inside her, a truth that had become more than just a fact. It had become part of her very essence. But now, with the house rising from the rubble once more, she could feel the weight of that truth, the responsibility it carried. The house had always been more than just a structure. It was an organism, a living, breathing entity that had fed off the souls of those who entered it. It had lived on their fear, their despair, and in return it had offered them a false promise of refuge. Laura had seen through it. She had broken its core, had severed the connection. But it wasn't enough. The house would not die, not completely. Because it was built on something far older than her, far older than the very walls that encased it. The house was made of souls. Souls that had been twisted, fragmented, and bound together by the dark energy that pulsed beneath the earth. They were the true heart of the house, and now that heart was inside her. And so was the house. She was the house. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the air that was thick with the scent of decay. The pull of the house was still there, tugging at her, urging her to return to it, to feed it. She could feel it, its hunger. But this time, it was different. This time, she was in control. Was she? The question lingered in the back of her mind like a shadow. It was the same question she had been asking herself ever since she had torn the heart of the house apart. She could feel the power coursing through her, but was it her power? Or was it the house, still clawing at her from the inside? Laura opened her eyes and looked once more at the twisted form of the house before her. The walls were rising, reshaping, the structure becoming whole again. Its pulse growing stronger with each passing moment. But as it did, something else began to shift. The dark energy that had once surrounded the house seemed to flicker, dissipating into the air like smoke. It wasn't just the house that was alive now, it was her. She could feel the energy building, swirling inside her, the voices of the lost souls merging with her own thoughts, their desperation lacing her every breath. But she was different. She had chosen this. She had embraced it. The house was hers to command now, and she would not let it consume her again. Laura stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the heart of the house. She could see it now. Feel it, a dark, swirling mass beneath the very foundations, hidden deep in the earth. The heart was alive. It had been there from the beginning, feeding, growing, expanding with each soul it took. But now, with Laura at its core, she was the new heartbeat. The pulse grew louder, resonating deep within her. She could hear the voices again. Whispers, pleas, cries. But this time, they weren't just echoes of the past. They were hers. They were the souls that had once been lost to the house. And now, they were within her, a part of her. Her hands shook, but there was no fear this time. She wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. She had embraced it. The house was hers, and she would make it her own. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and the walls of the house responded. They bent and twisted, the dark energy flowing through her as though it were an extension of herself. The house wasn't just a structure, it was a reflection of the souls inside it, and now it was a reflection of her. She was the master of the shadows. The energy that had once been so overwhelming, so suffocating, was now at her fingertips. She could feel it, twisting and turning, an immense force waiting for her command. And for the first time, Laura realized that she wasn't just controlling the house, she was becoming it. The souls inside her, the darkness, the pulse, it was all merging with her. It was overwhelming, but it was also liberating. She closed her eyes again, allowing herself to become the house. The walls, the floors, the darkness that had once consumed her, it was her now. She could feel it. The hunger, the power. But she didn't need to feed on others anymore. She could use the energy, bend it to her will. She could reshape the house, recreate it as she saw fit. It was no longer a prison, it was a tool, a weapon. She was in control. A deep, resonant voice echoed in her mind, one that she recognized instantly. The voice of the house, the one that had whispered to her for so long. But this time, there was no fear in its tone. There was no hunger, it was simply acceptance. You are the master now, the voice intuned, its deep, hollow resonance reverberating in the air. You are the heart. You are the house. Laura smiled, her lips curling into something that was neither a grin nor a frown. Something between them. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't relief. It was acceptance. She had broken the cycle. She had destroyed the house. But in doing so, she had become it. She had taken its power. And now, she could do whatever she wanted with it. The house began to shift, reforming itself, its walls stretching and twisting as it grew taller, more imposing. But this time, it was different. The shadows that had once crawled along the walls now danced at her command, swirling and flickering like flames. She could feel the souls inside her, their presence no longer a burden, but an extension of herself. The house, her house, stood taller than ever before, and then she did something new. She reached into the very core of the house and felt for the pulse of the souls. The ones that had been lost to the house, the ones she had freed, the ones that still lingered, waiting. She could hear their cries, their fear, their desperation. But this time, she didn't respond with hunger. She responded with compassion. She reached out and gathered them, their energies merging with hers. The house had fed on their fear, but she would feed on something else. She would give them what they had always sought, peace. And with that, the house began to change. The walls that had once been dark and oppressive now pulsed with a softer light. The shadows no longer whispered in fear. They whispered in comfort. The house had become something new, something more. It had once been a trap, a prison for the lost, but now it was a sanctuary. For the first time, Laura felt the pulse inside her slow, its frantic rhythm settling into something steady, something peaceful. She had won. She had become the master of the house. But now, she would rebuild it. And for the first time, she understood that the house didn't just need to consume, it needed to heal. And so, the house began its transformation. Not into a place of hunger, but a place of renewal. The house was alive again. But this time, it wasn't like before. The walls no longer creaked with despair, no longer groaned under the weight of the suffering they had borne for so long. But the shadows that had once scurried in the corners of every room no longer held the cold, hungry malice that had permeated every inch of the place. The dark pulse that had once been so overwhelming, so suffocating, now hummed with a soft, steady rhythm. Laura stood at the center of the house, her eyes open wide as she felt the transformation unfold around her. She could feel the house's energy shifting, reshaping itself under her command. The echoes of the lost souls that had once haunted its walls were now soft whispers in the air. No longer tormenting, but soothing. She could sense their presence, their memories, blending with her own, and in doing so, she could feel something, peace, beginning to take root in the very foundation of the house. The hunger was gone. Her hands, still trembling from the weight of everything she had done, stretched out before her. She could feel the power at her fingertips, a force that had once threatened to consume her, now flowing through her like a river of light. Her fingers twitched as she traced the air in front of her, and the house responded. The broken walls began to mend, the shattered floors repaired themselves, and the windows, once dark and filthy, now gleamed with light, the glass shimmering as the house itself seemed to breathe in time with her. The air was no longer thick with the suffocating weight of darkness. It was clear, fresh, like the first breath after a storm had passed. The house, her house, was no longer a place of torment. It was a place of healing. But as the house began to transform, so did Laura. She felt the souls inside her, their lingering presence no longer pulling at her mind. They were there, yes, but not as they had once been. No longer trapped or lost. They had been freed, given a purpose. Their essence had merged with hers, and in doing so, they had found something they hadn't known they were looking for. Peace. For the first time, Laura felt their gratitude. The voices, once a cacophony of despair, now whispered in unison, not of anguish but of calm acceptance. Their energies swirled inside her, no longer a burden, but a harmonious presence. It was as though the house itself had come alive through her, and in doing so, she had become the keeper of their souls. Not a captor, but a protector. The house no longer needed to feed. It no longer craved the souls of the lost. It had something new, a new purpose, a new life. As the house continued to repair itself, Laura could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the foundation of everything that had come before her. She could sense the deep, ancient roots of the house. But now, they no longer held the darkness. The darkness had been replaced with something brighter, something full of life. Something full of hope. She walked through the house, her footsteps light, barely making a sound. The once oppressive atmosphere that had suffocated her now felt welcoming, warm even. The doors opened effortlessly before her, no longer creaking in protest, but gently inviting her inside. The air that had once smelled of mildew and decay now smelled fresh, like new growth in a forest after the rain. Each room was its own world, transformed. What had once been cold, sterile, and empty now pulsed with life. The rooms were filled with light, soft, golden light that seemed to flow from every corner, spilling from the windows like warmth. The furniture, once broken and abandoned, was now whole, comfortable, inviting. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a home. But as she walked deeper into the house, the feeling of something stirring within her grew stronger. She had become the heart of the house. Yes, but there was something more, something deeper that she hadn't fully understood until now. The house was more than just a building. It was a living entity, not in the way that people lived, but in the way that nature did, constantly changing, constantly growing. And now, with her at its center, it was alive again. She reached the center of the house, the room where it all had started. The room that had once been so dark, so full of oppressive energy. Now it was warm, bathed in golden light. In the center of the room, there was a small garden, tended with care, its plants lush and green, flowers blooming. The garden was alive with color, the bright petals of the flowers reflecting the new energy that filled the house. Laura knelt beside the garden, her fingers brushing the petals of the flowers, feeling their softness. The air around her was still, peaceful, and she realized, with a start, that she had made the house into what it had always needed to be. It had been a place of torment, of endless hunger, but now it was a place of renewal. It was a sanctuary, not just for her, but for the souls that had once been lost within it. As she sat there, she felt the pull again, the pull of the house's pulse, the steady beat that resonated in her chest. But this time, it wasn't a force that she feared. It was a gentle reminder, a constant connection between herself and the house. She was still its heart, but now, it was hers too. And in that moment, she realized that she wasn't just a part of the house. She was its keeper. The voices of the souls, once fragmented and broken, now murmured around her, soft and soothing. They had found their place, their peace in the house. They were no longer just echoes of the past. They were part of something new, something whole. But just as she thought she had understood everything, just as she thought she had finally healed the house, there was a faint stirring in the distance. A sound, so faint it could have been a trick of the wind, but it was there. A rustling, a shiver that ran through the house itself. Her heart skipped a beat as she stood, turning to face the source of the sound. And then, she saw it. In the farthest corner of the garden, where the sunlight barely touched, a shadow moved. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough to make her pause. Her pulse quickened, and she felt the familiar stir of something dark. But this time, it wasn't the hunger of the house. It was something new. Something else. Laura took a step toward the shadow, her fingers tingling with the power that surged through her. But as she reached the corner, she realized something. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall, its features obscured by the dim light, but she could feel its presence, its power, and it was looking directly at her. A chill ran down her spine. What was this? The figure's form began to solidify, becoming clearer. It was a person, but not a person. A shadow. A reflection of something darker than what she had become. It was a piece of the house. A forgotten fragment, a remnant of the hunger that had once consumed everything. And it was coming toward her. The house was alive again. But this time, it wasn't like before. The walls no longer creaked with despair, no longer groaned under the weight of the suffering they had borne for so long. The shadows that had once scurried in the corners of every room no longer held the cold, hungry malice that had permeated every inch of the place. The dark pulse that had once been so overwhelming, so suffocating, now hummed with a soft, steady rhythm. Laura stood at the center of the house, her eyes open wide as she felt the transformation unfold around her. She could feel the house's energy shifting, reshaping itself under her command. The echoes of the lost souls that had once haunted its walls were now soft whispers in the air, no longer tormenting but soothing. She could sense their presence, their memories, blending with her own. And in doing so, she could feel something, peace, beginning to take root in the very foundation of the house. The hunger was gone. Her hands, still trembling from the weight of everything she had done, stretched out before her. She could feel the power at her fingertips, a force that had once threatened to consume her, now flowing through her like a river of light. Her fingers twitched as she traced the air in front of her, and the house responded. The broken walls began to mend, the shattered floors repaired themselves, and the windows, once dark and filthy, now gleamed with light, the glass shimmering as the house itself seemed to breathe in time with her. The air was no longer thick with the suffocating weight of darkness. It was clear, fresh, like the first breath after a storm had passed. The house, her house, was no longer a place of torment. It was a place of healing. But as the house began to transform, so did Laura. She felt the souls inside her, their lingering presence no longer pulling at her mind. They were there, yes, but not as they had once been. No longer trapped or lost. They had been freed, given a purpose. Their essence had merged with hers, and in doing so, they had found something they hadn't known they were looking for. Peace. For the first time, Laura felt their gratitude. The voices, once a cacophony of despair, now whispered in unison, not of anguish, but of calm acceptance. Their energies swirled inside her, no longer a burden, but a harmonious presence. It was as though the house itself had come alive through her, and in doing so, she had become the keeper of their souls. Not a captor, but a protector. The house no longer needed to feed. It no longer craved the souls of the lost. It had something new, a new purpose, a new life. As the house continued to repair itself, Laura could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the foundation of everything that had come before her. She could sense the deep, ancient roots of the house. But now, they no longer held the darkness. The darkness had been replaced with something brighter, something full of life. Something full of hope. She walked through the house, her footsteps light, barely making a sound. The once oppressive atmosphere that had suffocated her now felt welcoming, warm even. The doors opened effortlessly before her, no longer creaking in protest, but gently inviting her inside. The air that had once smelled of mildew and decay now smelled fresh, like new growth in a forest after the rain. Each room was its own world, transformed. What had once been cold, sterile, and empty now pulsed with life. The rooms were filled with light, soft, golden light that seemed to flow from every corner, spilling from the windows like warmth. The furniture, once broken and abandoned, was now whole, comfortable, inviting. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a home. But as she walked deeper into the house, the feeling of something stirring within her grew stronger. She had become the heart of the house, yes, but there was something more, something deeper, that she hadn't fully understood until now. The house was more than just a building. It was a living entity, not in the way that people lived, but in the way that nature did. Constantly changing, constantly growing. And now, with her at its center, it was alive again. She reached the center of the house, the room where it all had started. The room that had once been so dark, so full of oppressive energy. Now it was warm, bathed in golden light. In the center of the room, there was a small garden, tended with care, its plants lush and green, flowers blooming. The garden was alive with color, the bright petals of the flowers, reflecting the new energy that filled the house. Laura knelt beside the garden, her fingers brushing the petals of the flowers, feeling their softness. The air around her was still, peaceful, and she realized, with a start, that she had made the house into what it had always needed to be. It had been a place of torment, of endless hunger, but now it was a place of renewal. It was a sanctuary, not just for her, but for the souls that had once been lost within it. As she sat there, she felt the pull again, the pull of the house's pulse, the steady beat that resonated in her chest. But this time, it wasn't a force that she feared. It was a gentle reminder, a constant connection between herself and the house. She was still its heart, but now it was hers too. And in that moment, she realized that she wasn't just a part of the house. She was its keeper. The voices of the souls, once fragmented and broken, now murmured around her, soft and soothing. They had found their place, their peace, in the house. They were no longer just echoes of the past. They were part of something new, something whole. But just as she thought she had understood everything, just as she thought she had finally healed the house, there was a faint stirring in the distance. A sound, so faint it could have been a trick of the wind, but it was there. A rustling, a shiver that ran through the house itself. Her heart skipped a beat as she stood, turning to face the source of the sound. And then she saw it. In the farthest corner of the garden, where the sunlight barely touched, a shadow moved. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough to make her pause. Her pulse quickened, and she felt the familiar stir of something dark. But this time, it wasn't the hunger of the house. It was something new. Something else. Laura took a step toward the shadow, her fingers tingling with the power that surged through her. But as she reached the corner, she realized something. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall, its features obscured by the dim light, but she could feel its presence, its power. and it was looking directly at her. A chill ran down her spine. What was this? The figure's form began to solidify, becoming clearer. It was a person, but not a person. A shadow. A reflection of something darker than what she had become. It was a piece of the house. A forgotten fragment, a remnant of the hunger that had once consumed everything. And it was coming toward her. When Laura stood up, it was like a veil had lifted from her mind. The house was alive, but it wasn't the same. There was no more hunger, no more torment. The power that had once been oppressive and consuming now felt like a force of life. She walked through the halls, each step filled with a new sense of purpose. The garden in the center of the house had flourished, its flowers blooming brighter than ever. The air smelled fresh, pure, a sharp contrast to the decay that had once filled the space. The house was reborn, just as she had been. And as she stood at the center of it, she realized that the house had always been a reflection of its heart. It wasn't just a building. It was a living, breathing entity. And now it was whole. She wasn't just the house's keeper. She was its protector. The voices of the souls still lingered, but now they whispered not in fear, but in gratitude. They had found peace. They had found their place. And so had she. For the first time, Laura felt truly at peace. The house was no longer just a shadow of her past. It was her future. She would protect it. She would nurture it. Because now, the house was not just a place. It was home.